So let's go ahead and begin and call this to order. I think for transparency's sake and out of a good suggestion, we have 7 attendees and us 9 panelists, which includes Scott, myself, Anthony, Tony Rice, Tony Allegretti, Katrina Kindle. We have City of Urbana, then Tamara, Carol, and Lamont Peppers. If you'll remind me, I won't call out the attendees unless they raise their hand. Just as a good practice, we're fine tuning, but it's good to have it. This meeting is being recorded, and hopefully we'll make good use of it. I'm gonna put up the agenda on the screen. It's this one. To make sure that we're all there. I did put a couple of items that I wanted to make sure that you all got a heads up on under new business, but I'm open to rearranging or to a motion to approve it as it stands.
You want a roll call first?
Well, that would be nice. Thank you.
I don't know I don't know exactly how necessary it is, but we probably should.
Yeah, these rules and keeping track of it. So go ahead, Tamara.
Allegretti.
Present.
Ricardo Diaz.
Here.
Scott Dossett.
Here.
Katrina Kindle.
Here.
Tony Rice.
Here.
Thank you. We're all here. This is our regular CPRB board. As we'll talk about, we have a couple of openings, but it's nice to see everybody getting used to each other too.
So I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you, Katrina. Go ahead, Tamara.
Tony Allegretti.
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz.
Yes.
Scott Dossett.
Yes.
Katrina Kindle.
Yes.
Tony Rice.
Yes.
Thank you. So as we approve it, I remind everybody, we are alternating between these regular meetings and the hearings. At the hearings, we hear individual cases of appeals. We learn from them, and then we come back to our regular meetings and work on the long-term prospects, of which we made some progress, but I think after today we'll be better equipped for the details of all the intake we've done. But let's approve and move on to approving the minutes of December and February.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes from the regular meeting for December the 17th, 2020.
I need a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Tony.
Tony Allegretti.
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz.
Yes.
Scott Dossett.
Yes.
Katrina Kindle.
Yes.
Tony Rice.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's do now a February meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting for February the 24th, 2021.
Thank you, Scott.
I'll second.
Second by Allegretti.
Tony Allegretti.
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz.
Yes.
Scott Dossett.
Yes.
Katrina Kindle.
Yes.
Tony Rice.
Yes.
Thank you. So now that we are actually caught up as far as those minutes, we'll have public participation as usual in terms of, raise your hand and contribute. We'll have the time at the end. Especially today, I'm looking for feedback at that point at the end. So I hope some of you can hang on with us to contribute. But as you look at the agenda, if anybody has anything preemptive to say, I'd really like to hear it. Tamara, I enjoy your minutes. They're concise. That's good. Today, I found out through my notes from last meeting that I wasn't keeping track with doing the meeting and keeping my notes. Actually, I kept my notes. I just couldn't find things when I needed them. So if I can ask you to push a little bit on the details of it, who said who, kind of. You generally do that, but the interventions to me, especially today, are key.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Let's go ahead. Let me see. Meeting controls. Not giving me the full. Nope, it's making them even smaller. That's what it is. I'll stop sharing. And then it's easier to see. Okay, we have a raised hand amongst the panelists. That would be me. That's not good. And then we have no one raising their hand in public participation that I can see. Yes, we have Christopher Hansen. And then anybody else, you're welcome to raise your hand now so that just we can call out your order.
Hi, Ricardo, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, thanks. One moment. Okay, so I've been jotting down some notes, and I think, so the CPRB has been doing some appeals hearings, which I think is good because you guys hadn't done that in, well, almost ever. So that's good to be working that process. But I think what's not a good thing is kind of the, what I'm going to call CPRB case law that we're developing as we kind of go through these instances. And I'm going to kind of read through what I've jotted down here and you can see if you agree with that. So the trends, the case law that the CPRB has been developing over the past year or two is the Urbana Police Department and city staff can deny complaints for any number of invented reasons and no one will be held accountable. The Urbana Police Department and city staff can continue to invent obstacles and administrative friction to the process and no one will be held accountable. Even a police officer named within a complaint can himself deny that very complaint and the CPRB will go along with that. Prejudicial statements can be made during the complaint review process and the board leadership have even doubled down on those statements. The expert hired by the city to serve as a hearing officer does not appear to be familiar with the CPRB ordinance and does not take any action when the rights of the appellant are being tread upon. That leaves the appellant all on their own to know the ordinance and essentially act as an attorney. The Urbana Police Department can pick and choose what parts of a complaint they prefer to respond to, and they can ignore the parts of the complaint that they do not wish to respond to, and the CPRB has given a thumbs up to that tactic. Elected and appointed officials can publicly lambast people for submitting police complaints and for calling the police. Flagrant violations of the rules against retaliation and retribution receive no attention whatsoever by the city staff, who are tasked with investigating those exact types of violations. City staff can play games with the efficacy of the CPRB and the board members will be complicit. The mayor will deny CPRB seats to any applicants whom she thinks won't be pliable enough in the process. The mayor then publicly complains about not being able to fill vacant seats, even though she has applicants who are just waiting in the queue to serve on this board. So these are just some of the things I wrote down. I'm pretty sure I missed a bunch of them, but the developing case law for the CPRB does not look good. And this is why people aren't gonna want to participate in your process. So, and keep in mind, you guys have received complaints that you have deemed, or maybe just discussed, perhaps too minor for your board to consider. But you've also received some very, very serious complaints, which the city is not allowing you to look at because they've considered them to be too major for you to consider. So I'm wondering what maybe the board needs to be a little more proactive in telling the city, you know, this is what we want to do. We don't agree with this. Because from the civilian side, or I should say the complainant or the resident side or whatever, the non-police side, process does not look approachable, and it doesn't. So that's why you guys don't get complaints and you don't get appeals normally, because everyone looks at this and they just don't think it's worth engaging. And I think you're in a position to start to change that, but you need to stop just kind of blindly agreeing with the pressure put upon you by city staff and the police department, and start listening more to the public and start doing your own thing and saying, we are going to do this. I think that's the right posture. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. I think some of those issues will come up in later discussions. So I don't see anyone else wanting to comment at this time. So I want to go ahead with the items as outlined. And I'm hoping that some of them will be a response of some of the things that Mr. Hanson addressed. Any other, that's my perspective. Anyone else wanna comment on this?
Can I ask a question to Mr. Hanson? Is that possible?
You can do whatever you want from your side. We don't normally engage in dialogue, and I hate that. So I think you asking a question makes it at least so that it's open to do so.
I was not able to write down all of the things that Mr. Hanson has an issue with. I do want to know, Mr. Hanson, do you have specific dates, or was your list of things that have occurred that you feel unjust just in general?
Well, first off, I'm always happy to talk to people. I think that's great, as kind of like Ricardo said. I can put specific dates on some of those items, but they were general things that I wrote down. But they aren't, in my opinion, they aren't just hand waving. Those are associated, each of those things, with specific findings or determinations by the city and by the CPRB. So I don't know if you had any particular one or ones that concerned you, and I can try to explain when I think that happened, or you can, if it seems too complicated, I can email you something or whatever you want to do. But
no, it doesn't seem complicated. I haven't been on the board very long. So
right.
You say like a year or two ago, and a year or two ago, this was not relevant to me, but it's relevant to me now. So if there was a specific date that I can go back to learn from how your issue came about, then that would help me. But if you don't have specific dates on those things that you say happened a year or two ago, then it doesn't help me to learn better.
Well, I can certainly try to send you some dates, and maybe that's a better thing to follow up by email. But one thing I'll strongly urge you to do, and this goes for all the new members if you haven't done it, is to watch all the CPRB meetings from the past, year or two, and I think that would be really instructive. And maybe you've already done that, but does that help at all? Or
No, thank you for answering my question. I just want to know, were there specific things that pull those things out, or just in general? Thank you. I appreciate that.
all right, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed that. Let's go through some of the unfinished business and get some status of pending things. And I think when we get to new business, Katrina, some of your pinpointing will also happen. Status of complaints and appeals. Carol, I hadn't touched base with you on that. But Scott, you may be able to access the
Well, I can tell you that we've only had one complaint so far in 2021.
okay. It's the one we saw.
And so that's unchanged since the last time you all met.
Okay.
And we have had no appeals in 2021 that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a comment. Carol, did you see my note about the redaction of that complaint as it exists on the portal?
I did. And yeah, and I haven't been in the office, so I will follow up on that when I get back in the office.
Yeah. I think given the timing constraints that we're supposed to be under, we should probably be getting some letters maybe added to that too. So, I'll check in next week sometime and see.
Okay.
Thank you. We're doing a much better process in that as we get things, for me, the rules and the practices are clarified, and having unredacted reports on our portal help just to get a feel of it. But thank you, Carol, for taking care of that, and Scott for pointing out the redaction needs. So that would be just the status of those complaints. I want to make sure, I'm going to bring it up now, even though it comes later on the announcements. I've also been searching out the status of TASER, in that we have been under to review, ever since we voted about a year ago, to review the discharges. Let me make sure that I see my mail on it, but I believe I'm prepping so that at the next meeting we have the TASER review. We do some of the TASERs. From what I understand, Tony's and Katrina have been through training. Is that correct, on TASERs?
Yeah, I did it last week.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, is that true also for you, Tony Rice and Katrina?
Yes.
Okay.
Monday the 15th, I believe.
Thank you.
You may be muted, Katrina, if you're trying to speak to us.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, we went on the 15th. Tony
Okay.
Rice and I went together.
Yep.
Thank you. Scott, I know we've done TASERs before, and you wrote the book on it, but I've sent a request that you and I go through at least an abbreviated version, because you know how they work, how they handle the cartridge, the TASER policy, the camera, and then the video review. That's what they went through. We could probably stand to freshen up. So before the next meeting, when we do the as far as numbers, I believe there is one discharge that needs to be reviewed. The other discharges are that have happened are also what's it called? They're in court, and so we don't see them until they do finish through that, or if they come to us. Well, we after they go through that, I guess by our agreement, then we would see them anyway, because we do see them. But so we have 2 cases that we can do, it says here, and 6 other discharges from 2019 to the present are still pending dispositions on their criminal proceedings. But if you and I, Scott, then go through at least, refresher course, we'll all be ready to do them on the next meeting, which is on the 28th of April, and we can concentrate. Okay.
Yeah, I saw Cyril's note after the back and forth today, and I'm available about any time. I think you and I just need to compare calendars with UPD and see when that happens. Now, my understanding is that what we need to do is to redo one. This is I believe it was April 19. Where we had asked for any more, and actually were reminded by a member of the community that we needed to follow through with that. And then we've got one that's a brand new one. I thought I could be an error. So
I think that's what it's looking like. But because we haven't done any for a while, it's good to everybody have about the same info, so that when we review, we can be as thorough as possible.
sure.
And in this case, it includes full camera participation, which has, well, won't go into the history. I just wanted to make sure that under this item, we covered that as the status of complaints, appeals, and then TASER reviews, okay? So we got it pending for next meeting. 5B, discussion of changes to the qualifications of CPRB. We As a reminder, we voted a couple of meetings ago to say, why shouldn't we have somebody with a felony participate in the sport? And we voted to say that we recommend that they do participate. And we commissioned two of you, to go to City Council and report that so that they know our view. Been thinking quite a bit about reporting to council in general. And so for this particular item, we chose two people. Raise your hand. You said yes. Tony?
I don't remember.
I think it was you and me, Scott.
Yeah.
Regarding the,
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So I need to get together with you, Tony, and decide when, what Monday we want to do that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we requested then the city to build us in, not as a public participation, but as a slot. And
Okay.
we know that they've been, they've been swamped too, but we've requested that. Any update on that, Carol, as to when that would happen?
I wasn't aware of that request, but I'm interested in knowing from you now that I'm hearing about this. Is this something that you just want to report to council for their information for inclusion in a larger set of amendments, or you want to do an ad hoc amendment to the ordinance for this item alone? Because it's going to take an ordinance amendment in order to do that.
Correct.
So what's your intention there?
My recollection is that this was to make them aware of it. After today's meeting, maybe we'll be requesting a different approach to that visit, but to schedule us into the next possible meeting as soon as possible at the next meeting, in which we can have 5 to 10 minutes to report from the CPRB, and this will be one of the items.
Okay, well, I'll ask right now, then the next meeting is April 5th. And if Scott and Tony are available on April 5th, the next meeting after that's the 12th.
Yeah, the 5th is fine with me. Carol, there's a pretty good note in the minutes that we just okayed for the 27th about that.
Okay.
And in my mind, this is I'm the one who made the motion and brought the issue to the board. And in my mind, this is, more of a longer term folded in, perhaps with the rest of the amendments that the ordinance, is going to require. Mm-hmm. I see this being on a 3 to 6 month time frame, as opposed to trying to ask for an individual amendment to the ordinance. That was never my intent. Now, how the rest of the board feels about that, we can gauge, but.
Because I would advise you to proceed that way, just because if we piecemeal everything, then we'll be doing ordinance amendments to the CPRB ordinance. I can come up with.
Right. No, that's not
week after week. Okay.
No, that's not that's not what I meant by bringing it up. So.
Okay. So originally it was to make them aware, and so a brief section at a regular meeting. Katrina.
Okay. Tony, does that work for you? Tony Allegretti, does the 5th work for you?
Yeah, the 5th should be fine.
Okay, I'll put you guys down.
Thank you. Katrina, you're on mute.
I was just scratching my eye. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's how I signal that I want to talk, so we're good. All right.
Can I just ask? It's been long enough that I want to make sure that I get it right. It's the meeting started at 7 o'clock, right? Council.
We've been starting earlier. The 5th. I'm guessing that we're going to have a closed session on the 5th. We've been starting earlier because we've been doing some training for the new incoming council members, and we wanted to start even before the general election because there's so much to do. So we've been starting the meetings around 6. And what I am guessing will happen is, I don't know exactly the order of things, but given that we'll probably do one training session, so that would be 30 minutes. And then we'll have a closed session, which I also think will last about 30 minutes. I think you should expect to come up around 7. but
Okay.
the meeting itself will start probably 6.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that pacing. Those meetings, there are so many, we're a small town, but a lot of things are run through council precisely because we're a small city. So, all right, thank you. So that finishes us on 5B and 5C, which is just something we left pending and we're circling back. Is there anything else that's pending before we get on to new business? All right, your face is not saying otherwise, then we should go on to 6A, which is a discussion of us. We've now had several hearings in which most of us have participated. And so I wanted to actually to do a listing, and this is where I especially want to get Tamara to jot them down, because I haven't used the minutes as well as I would like to. That is, I've been relying on my own notes, but the official record I think is good, especially because hearings have this structure of we open for the public and then we have a closed hearing and then we come back and we vote, and that's what it is. The vote is straight up on what was scheduled, but there's never any details that come up for most of the people involved. And so I had asked you to think through some of the things, observations you have gotten, some of the conclusions that you've gotten. As I was looking through my notes over the weekend for this last one, but I started going back, and we have gotten some practice now on doing hearings. We've all participated on them. We expect to run more, but I wanted to do a small recap of things you have learned or things that you said during the hearing. This we should bring up as changes either to ordinance or whatever. So I'm not asking you to talk about the individuals involved. I'm asking you to give me some feelings so we can list them and then sequence them as to the other changes that we're suggesting. We have encountered lots of gaps on the ordinance, but also on the practices that we have had. So while I compile and bring back my notes, does anybody want to start there?
I'll start, I guess. What I've learned being a new member thus far is I observe a lot of things, so usually I don't ask questions unless it's not pondering in my head. So I've learned how to formulate my questions better to make them relevant, and I'm proud of myself for that, because when I first got on the board, I didn't know about the different sides as regards to filing a complaint, appeals, the department making their part. So I'm slowly learning how to connect the pieces together, and I'm proud of myself for that. And I do ask questions when I am not sure of something. So I'm still learning, but I'm better than I was when I first got on the board, I feel.
Thank you. It's easy to forget that we are just regular people down the street that often we don't have a lot of exposure to city workings, how rules work, and for that I'm also happy that we have a hearing officer. In spite of comments, we're building together a system that we can rely on and we can expect, and especially as new members, that you'll have that opportunity to learn and grow with the questions. So thank you. Somebody else? Well, related to that, now we have a hearing officer who's been with us several times, which I think is also a gain. Before that, we had only a couple of hearings, and so the officer themselves, when they walked in, they might be unsure or did not have experience with cases as well as now we do. And I think that's important to establish practice and and comfort with each other as to how we're going to operate. So that's another gain for me. Want to bring another one?
Well,
Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
I agree with the new member portion of it that Katrina stated, because when I got here, I didn't understand anything about this. And the minutes being provided, the last of the said hearings that we have or meetings that we have, that brings it all back to focus for me, because I'm not doing this every day.
Yeah.
It's very enlightening to get the knowledge to be able to try to assist the community in, making a better arrangement between community and police department.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. I do.
I do too. And in one of the hearings, I remember having that learning that I can share with other members of the community around me. That is, frankly, very few people are going to worry about how the CPRB works unless they have a complaint.
Right.
But having and trusting a procedure as having participated makes it a lot easier for me to talk to somebody and encourage them to get themselves in the system, so that, because we know how it's going to work.
Right.
So thank you. I actually think that, number one, we're a very small town, but two, as we develop these procedures, it better prepares us for difficult ones that might be coming along. It's one thing that people, we're small enough that people know their police officers often, who patrols what area. May not be exactly by neighborhood because we're not a big city, but there are not that many officers. And so you start getting a feel for who it is, and some of those things you just talk to them. But when there's a complaint. Related to that, I was very happy that at one of the hearings we noticed that the way somebody could complain was the walking up to the office, to the what's it called? The glass counter. And I now see how intimidating that can be, because in fact, as I go by, when I come to the city, I see people inside and I'm outside. I understand the safety part, but I think that as we're going to go into one of the other options, how people can complain is a very important part of encouraging people to put their complaints and commendations to officers. It cannot be through a piece of glass in which the police are on the other side of the glass. As a consequence of that, I saw a couple of YouTube videos in which, frankly, the police officers were there waiting and questioning the person making the complaint and asking him stuff about the complaint right then and there, which I found was, wow. It just is intimidating. So, yeah. Other pieces that you've been in the hearing and made a note about? I learned that at one of them, also the complaints against the chief. Our process right now says that when a complaint is submitted, it goes to the chief, then the chief requests an investigation by one of his subordinates, and then they turn it back into the chief. We don't, so when, and that would be definitely a conflict of interest if somebody's complaining against the chief, for something that he did. So I think one of the other learnings for me is that we need to have a procedure for delegating when there is a complaint about the chief, how we go about it. Over the last year, we've been making things up as we go along because we had not enough guidance or law that would tell us what to do. And I think in this one, I flagged it as what would happen? What would we do? So I think we need to establish some procedure when that is true. Related to that, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and that was all part of the thought process that went into removing the inbound complaint receipt to the HR from UPD. I think the way, hopefully we are, at least, as we were working through that process, my understanding was that, there's going to be a layer above UPD where the complaints are going to get processed by the new HREO person or someone in HR, maybe people that are already on the call. And so, in my mind, one of the big justifications for that would be for just this case, so that we can kind of clean up the entry system. Some of the timing issues that continue to come up, hopefully will be clarified. And, any allegation of bias by UPD in terms of complaint receipt and processing, I hope we probably can't eliminate, but we can, facilitate a more smooth kind of movement of the complaint through the city structure.
Yeah, completely. Both at the entry and then as to how it's addressed, because we would not want to receive a complaint about the chief, even if it's through HR, because the chief would get it. And so we need to clear that up when we make the next set of recommendations. But yeah, we also, related to that one, I've learned how important it is. We've been dealing with a lot of cases, some of them back numbered, and I believe every single complaint, in whichever way it was sent to us, has now had a number, and it's been in our process to deal with them as complaints and in many cases also appeals. But the triage that we talked about a couple of months back, in fact, I think in the minutes it was, we do need a way for when it comes in, which ones are the jurisdiction of the CPRB. There were several that came into us that we knew we didn't consider, but at one of them, we certainly missed Daryl, our other board member, because he was also very good at reminding us, this doesn't fit us. We are not called by the ordinance to do this. So that triaging of when they come in and who the complaint is about, I think has to do with us writing it. Yes, the city council can do it, but I think if we wrote it with the best of our knowledge, we would have we would have more information than most other people involved in this kind of process. Thank you. I think also there needs to be, I've learned through some of the comments and eventual hearings sometimes, there needs to be a definition of what a FOIA procedure is and what it gives to people. Because I believe that somebody who puts in a complaint ought to have as much information as possible about their complaint. And right now we have no structure to feed the hunger of the information regarding a complaint, both to the city and to the resident. So if we are the only ones that hold the full information for a hearing, it's fair, but there's many pieces right now that have been not necessarily transparently traded. And I think that we could stand some bettering on that. I have a couple more, but I want to hear you guys' minds to other things you have observed at hearings.
I don't know if this falls in there, but I observed that I had a question in regards to the 14-day rule in regards to responding after a person turns in their complaint, because I needed somewhere along the line the clarification, because if you turn your complaint into one person, does your 14-day clock start then? Or since that person that you turn in your complaint to is not the person that starts the process, does the 14-day complaint, your 14-day window that the department or the city has to respond, does it start once that person gets it? So somewhere along the line, there needs to be some clarification on when exactly the 14 days starts. Does that include holidays? Does that include weekends? Because if you're a person turning in a complaint and you leave the building after turning in your complaint, or you mail it, a person could make the assumption that's my 14 days. And just some clarity needs to be put on that, on the 14-day window.
Very true, Katrina. I think we've encountered that. And I learned something when we were discussing that. It had not occurred to me, but again, as a regular person, it makes sense to me now, but I had never walked it through, and that is this. The ordinance puts dates to file a complaint or to, follow up. And I've learned, actually because of the TASER, is that because when somebody puts in a complaint, then any video or evidence gets frozen. I remember walking through, Scotty, as we were going through the TASER thing, that the cameras on the TASERs only have a certain amount of memory. And so they need to recycle that memory. They download it, but even on the downloading, there's limited space. So you have to figure out, it's kind of like the security cameras that have that they're recording. After a while, they'll record over something unless it's been tagged. And that was learning to me, because you need to have a limit as to how long somebody has to complain, because otherwise the evidence of the video will be rewritten, or the audio too, I imagine. There's limited space. So I understand that an ordinance must have that date constraint so that when somebody gets deleted, it's not part of the mess. On the other hand, internally, this is a clarification for me. If the police is doing an investigation, there are many things that can slow down an investigation. And so there's a limit as to when the 14-day happens, but when they get a response from it. But darn it, there are times at which any investigation, my kids and I like pop shows, and recently we've been on the kick listening to the 48 hours. If something is resolved within if it isn't resolved in 48 hours, it's going to be much harder. But from an investigation perspective, when is too long to investigate something? And I'm glad that we have parameters, but you can't force it to be finished under a certain time. We need a regular and enforceable reporting procedure to say the investigation is not done after 30 days, but we need 30 more or whatever. But that the information is there in our portal so that we know the status of things. It's more work to update a sheet, but it's a lot better tracking when something's happening. So thank you, Katrina. You triggered that one. That was in my notes somewhere, but I hadn't recapped it here. Anybody else?
I think, Ricardo, so one thing that I can bring up, we had talked about, this was an appeal from a while ago, about just having the board members making sure we had all the information before. I know the ordinance says that we can subpoena certain documents, video, pictures. And I think at one point we discussed having like a standing order that in all appeals, the board will request, if they exist, and then list out everything. I don't know if we got there yet. For the last couple of appeals, I haven't been on them, but for some of the ones that maybe involve more substantive reviews as opposed to, I think some of the last ones were more administrative issues, but I think that still needs to get done just so that we're not, because I think I think this is the November appeal, there was some information we didn't have, or some reports we didn't have that would have been useful in determining what had happened. I think specifically it was incident reports we were missing about. I think they were about the reports about the bicycles or something like that. But
I think you're right, Tony. And if I remember correctly, this was a Scotty, that we need to have what the ticket said, what information the officer had when they were called to
the
situation.
Metcad reports and
exactly.
Yeah,
because it is very important to know what the police officer had in their hand when they walked into a situation, and that would be the Metcad report, and having it as part of our standing list of items for a review. And so by requesting it, figuring out who and how is going to be done is, I realize it's going to be a pain, but it turned out to be a very important piece for us to learn what was reasonable.
In a typical, not that I know what a typical complaint would be, but, I think the list of things we'd be asking for wouldn't be more than, 10 items, video, reports, actual handwritten reports, video camera recordings, and possibly 911 calls, audio tapes, and the Metcad reports, that, and any associated other collected audio or video from non-police or non-city agencies. So, if someone were to have taken photos themselves or something, but I don't think it's that much, but having all that stuff beforehand, I think may speed up the process and may, just get everybody on the same page quicker.
Well, I think it's also for transparency's sake. That's the standing, that's what should be in the portal. And when one of those is missing, because things happen, then there needs to be a note that said could not be got, is in a different
an
place.
explanation, right? Yeah.
So that standing order, you made a list, but that's why I asked Tamara to pay particular attention, because I think today's formulation for me is the paper that we worked from to start drafting. What changes do we need along the way? Actually, so one reminder there, because I don't think that there was a question about it, but I think that there should be no question about it. Those items that we would make a standing order for, are there under penalty of whatever for somebody not having it there. And in this case, I am talking city staff, but I think it's also for other people to know that it's not okay to leave gaps in that information. When we went without staff for a while, Scott, we know that things started falling apart as to what we had and what we didn't. And somebody needs to be responsible so that it doesn't fall off the radar, that these cases are well documented. And well, this jumps me up to a related piece on another topic, but it is under whatever penalty that voids need to be done. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I hope that we can kind of get out of this sort of what appears to be an endless loop of appeals and get back a little bit more to what I think of as the really basic duty of the board, and that's the processing of individual complaints. Because, you know, if you spent much time on the portal at all, then you know that, you know, we routinely see feedback from investigations. I mean, you can literally start with a complaint form, get the documentation of the response from the complaint, and see, you know, whether it was a shift sergeant or whoever did the investigation. All of that stuff is in the file. Probably the thing that I would say I maybe lack total understanding about is how we get video. And I know that there's a concern with how much and how long they have to house it. So that's something that I'd like to work on a little bit more. But I hope that as we, get a little bit more freeboard to be able to actually look and keep real time with complaints that are in the portal, that people develop, good, maybe better confidence in terms of the kind of information that is available to us. Of course, I say that after having done this review, for about 6 or 7 years worth of data, and having looked at all of that stuff by paper. And so I think, Mr. Allegretti, there's volume of stuff there. And I think you're right. I think we probably need a checklist, and we need to be thinking about that. That's what the audit that Ricardo and I did for 2019 was really all about, was kind of starting to help staff as we got re-engaged with them, get the things that we needed on the portal. And so, it's good to be thinking through those.
But that's not that brought up an issue I think that I saw floating on as you looked at summarizing the several years. We don't have data on ethnicity or race of the people that put in the complaints. Having been a minority and having had to deal with categories, it used to be that there was black, white, and other. And I was always other, because there was no beige on the list of race. In recent years, it's become very, let's say beefier on checking off. And one of them ought to be, I don't want to report this. I don't want to classify myself. And that comes in gender, and that comes in also race and ethnicity. But we ought to have some kind of tally so that we can watch out for that a certain group is not being excluded or treated differently. And unfortunately, we don't have information on that for several years. It wasn't kept, it wasn't required. And so we need to standardize what we take in, and we should, with each other, check what list of things we want on that list, so that whatever suspicions we have or whatever the makeup of our world has made it so that we want to be careful on that, we need to start picking that information up so that we can vouch for it.
Well, we talked about this when we redid the form to make the submittal address change. And, there was concern, there are lots of concerns, the multilingual form, are we going to allow people to file online, and all of that kind of stuff just kind of gets in and confuses. But I can tell you for certain, I don't have the draft of the report in front of me now, but when I looked at those years of data, I could only identify race or sex and maybe 30% of the occasions.
Yeah.
Because it's not an item that we've asked them to report, and the current form doesn't do that either. So.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying is, if we don't have it because the person chose not to give it to us, that's fine with me. But when we didn't even think of asking, we are not, some of your words have been to look for patterns. And patterns need some kind of evidence, data for us to get a grasp of. Related to actually, a previous thought, but now I'm bringing it into play. we definitely need a change on how we vote on the disposition on an appeal. Right now, the 5 categories that we have, support the findings letter of the chief, do not support the findings of the chief, remand for further information. There's a no action one, I can't remember what it is, and then the 5th one of saying this should go to mediation. We have found over and over again, it's inadequate. There are times at which we want to say more, we want to vote slightly differently so it reflects the case, and we haven't had that. So for me, several of the votes that we've taken on hearings have been an inadequate number of categories to be able to say what we want to say. And at this point, the only requirement is for the chair to write a note to the chief when we disagree with the chief. No other explanation needed. And I understand privacy is important, but there needs to be some learning of what happened, both on the complainant side, but also on the police department side. What did we consider and where did we lean, or why we leaned in that way? There needs to be more info for my taste, because there have been times in which I felt inadequate just voting. But we have a setup that doesn't allow for further elaboration, but helps the decisions to make sense. So, any more? I welcome them. Today I asked Emma to take those notes a little bit more concisely so we have a running list so that we can start integrating them sooner rather than later. Like you said, 3 to 6 months. Okay, 3 to 6 months, but I'd rather go hit towards the 3 because we've already had at least 3 to be thinking and mulling, and now the experience of the hearings is helping us get there. So any other comments on hearing reflections on the hearings? Okay, I have a couple of others that I'll bring up as when we come back to this topic. I want to move it on to a check-in for the next for subsequent meetings. All right, thank you. That's 6A. 6B, CPRB board. We have had 2 slots for a little while, and while I'm very comfortable with all of you now, we've been through a few together. This board was meant to have 7 voices, and so I want to make sure that we get at least 2 more in the process. The mayor makes the appointments. We have been invited to the interviews recently. I heard somebody at council asking that they should be at the interviews. So there's a process question here as to who should be deciding who sits on our board and procedures for that. But right now I want to concentrate on, we need to bring a couple more people on. You know, if the mayor is not going to approve everyone we recommend or that we invite, then we should invite 3 or 4 very directly so that the mayor has a choice. Or that we recommend some other procedure, but right now I really feel the need to have other voices. I think it strengthens the validation that we give to any case. So I'm open to ideas, starting on another page.
Ricardo, do we or do you see who's applied?
We get a notice. I've gotten a notice, at least in my time as chair the last 6 months.
Mhm.
I get a notice of who has applied, and then I've gotten a resume eventually, and then a scheduled interview. I've been to 3 maybe. Scott, you went to 1 interviews?
Is there, and this is addressing maybe the public comments just about why we have spots that they should be filled. Do we find out if someone doesn't accept, do we get a reason? Did the person ultimately decline because they, didn't think they had the time, or was it offered and then declined, or was it just never offered to some person? I'm wondering what the, since we've had a couple standing spots open, is it a problem that there's not enough people applying? So, how do we get more people to apply? Or is it a problem of we're getting applicants, but we're not getting, either people are declining them or they're, for whatever reason, not meeting the requirements of the people deciding?
So here we run into the problem of trying to be transparent at the same time trying to be sensitive to privacy. So I can tell you that in general, I have gotten the information of the status of applicants, but not necessarily on what caused that status. So we do need more applicants, because if it's not on my court to decide whether somebody's in or not, or on our as a board, then the more applicants we have, the better chances we have of one, two of them being approved. I believe that this is a part of the ordinance that might need more spelling out. I heard a member of City Council wanting to participate further. Ultimately, it's their decision if they make the ordinance and declare it in the ordinance who else might participate. And then there's your general question. I have a friend on the county board who said they got 25 positions open for different task force at the county level. I think Terrell has at times said that they also have at the city level many openings in many boards. So I know that there is a need for more civically engaged people in our town, but that's nice and all. I'm interested in our 2 slots, right? So getting more people, and frankly, I was thinking maybe I should take up, I notify people and I kind of mention it in passing and sometimes in emails, but I was thinking over the weekend that we need to be more systematic. Visit churches, send out a letter to through the city system of contacts or our own contacts, have one letter that we all send to everyone that we know that is in a position to perhaps recruit, and say, I'd be willing to talk to them if you'll make this announcement in your church bulletin, or that's the first one that occurs to me. But if we have to, why don't we place a Facebook ad, request money from the city and say, we need $300 so that it starts popping up in people's YouTube habits. Something, but I don't think, I'm unsatisfied with having 2 slots. And then, Daryl's situation, he had to step back. Health and family go first. We're regular neighbors. So anyway, so any more ideas on that?
Have we reached out to, I'm just thinking students, and I know that would pose a problem, that there'd be a lot of turnover, but have we ever had a student on the board that lived in Urbana?
No, we have not.
This is just kind of popping into my head. I'm just wondering if that, one, that's a different voice that we don't, sounds like we haven't had on here. I mean, the only, I guess, problem I see is that, we've only got them for, 9 months out of the year. Not that they couldn't appear, virtually maybe in the future, but I don't know, maybe trying to get someone, and, not that students have all the free time in the world, but I have, recently come to wonder what I did with a lot of my free time. Now that I don't have much.
Only grad students have all that time. The undergrads are busy partying, so.
Right.
No, but why not? We need to reach out to them too. And, you know, let's say we have them 2 years. That's 2 years that there's a training, they become engaged. And the reason I love working with students is just because they're fresh. They may not know much sometimes, but they come up with an idea that was like, wow, you know, that was me 30 years ago. I did
Mhm.
think back cleanly. Since then,
It,
it's gotten
it could
complicated.
lead to, you know, finding their own replacement or something like that.
Yeah.
Kind of self.
Or maybe establishing a group on campus that we normally ask applicants from.
Yeah,
Surely
right.
there's a club out there.
Mhm.
SRO. Thank you. That's a great idea. Social media, churches.
I don't know how much an ad costs in the Daily Illini. Or on, I
Up
mean,
cheaper now, probably, since they've mostly gone online.
yeah.
But we maybe that's what we need. Exhausting possibilities of your circles. I'm thinking maybe it's not a good message at the Rotaries, but is it at? I mentioned it at the Immigration Forum and at the Welcoming Center, but I haven't pursued anybody. I kind of see who might be a little bit interested before I give them more and overwhelm them. Can I ask, how were you guys disposed to this? I was recruited basically by Scott. I was going to apply for another board, and then he said, why not here? And so I said, I guess why not? I just want to be involved. So that's how I got here.
I was referred by a friend that there was a spot open, and so I through
Was
my
interested.
Yeah, I was approached by a coworker actually, and
Okay.
they thought it'd be a good, interesting venture for me.
Mhm.
And I was referred by someone who is no longer my friend.
Thanks to the CPR.
She is no longer my friend, but she said that that would be a good idea, and she was right on that aspect. So I appreciate her for that, my ex-friend, for telling me, hey, you should apply to be on this board.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks like either we ask our friends or we put something out there that somebody reads and they ask their friends. So let me work with city staff to come up with what we have and to circulate it enough. And then they've got to go through their budget things and whatever else, but multiplying the information that we are open is, I believe, one. I think that also works for complaints. That is, there are people out there that probably don't know that there's a complaint process. But I can guarantee you that when somebody's really mad about something, they're going to find out the complaint process. And they probably don't have much history with us. They just want to put in a complaint. So I believe that there hasn't been a lot of complaints because there haven't been enough mad people about the way they were treated. Because in any organization, if the situation's bad, there will be complaints. So it's a disposition I have because I also abide by that. I just complain about my sunflower seeds that I love so much. And Agro something sent me a $2 coupon, and I was like, I did not expect that. I just wanted an email to tell me why my seeds were bad. But it happens. So, all right. I'm open with this list too of how else we can bring somebody on. Originally, I had wanted to commit you guys to do something so that we can each do something in the next near future to invite somebody else. I can't think of what that would be right now except asking a friend. I'm committing to talking to the city to have a good write-up that we can use in our emails. But unless somebody's comfortable in saying, I can commit to that. Ask a friend.
Well, I'll post the social media stuff that I have here in the historic East Urbana neighborhood. You know, I mean, we all serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and that it's her right and responsibility to fill the positions. You know, but I've only been invited to and went to one interview process. I think it was a fairly friendly process. You know, just for anybody who may be listening out there now or who might see these, I didn't really feel as if, you know, the subject was being grilled or anything like that necessarily. Lots of opportunity just for mutual exchange. And so I don't see any impediment there, but it would be nice to know whether 10 people have applied and have all been rejected. I mean, that kind of gets to the heart of one of Mr. Allegretti's question.
Whether they have been rejected or they have rejected.
Or they have rejected, that's right. I find it hard to believe that the process you have to go through the interview would be enough to dissuade someone who had thoughts about public service. That's one of the reasons I mentioned, you know, what I felt, you know, in that meeting. But I think you're right. I think we need a good balance of all of the interests that lie in our community. You know, as a straight white retired male, I don't really go out into what you might call alternative spaces very much. And so, you know, I do know people who have been involved in PACE. That's a local disability advocate organization. And so I will try to come up with a couple of those, you know, kind of other groups and try to make direct contact with those people. So.
Thank you. A question for you guys. I've been invited to the interviews and as chair before. I don't remember having been invited before I was chair. Maybe that was just not the practice. I don't even know if there were interviews before, but would you all be interested? If I'm invited and I can't make it, I sent out the notice for one of them, not too long, you know, last the cycle somewhere in the fall. Would you all be interested? Just send me a note if you want to be participating in that. Because I think, as I've always believed, I'm here temporarily. And COVID really reminded me of that. And so the more experience we each have, the better we are at continuing the gains that we've had up to now of the learning. So that's why I invite you guys to. All right. Anybody else want to pledge an action on this? I'll work on having wording that we can float around, but I will also make it a point to make an announcement at least 2 meetings in the next week with people that I know in the various groups I'm involved with. Because I when you mentioned PACE, I serve on a health board that I might, why not? Just hadn't processed it well enough. All right. Okay, I'm going to move on then to the next item. 6C is a reference to the triage of complaints, and 6D is just an update on use of force, use enforcement policy discussion, use of force discussion. And I had brought this up about a month ago. So just to contextualize, but to me, 6C, how are we gonna take the cases when somebody puts in a complaint, we need to establish a procedure, and then we need to give them criteria, give whoever we designate as the receipt of complaints, the criteria to help categorize them so that we, as was mentioned several times, we have the cases that most fit what our purview is. So right now we're only talking about process, not the who. How do we do this? I thought about committee, that we form a smaller committee to, 2 of us to draft and incorporate ideas. I've also thought of saying, why don't we just establish something slightly broader? I think Carol just lit up, but I think that we need to finish that. The last time, Carol, you did your own categorizing too, which was helpful, very helpful. But, this affects you too. So,
Can I say something?
Carol, Scott, yeah.
So when we had talked about this some months ago, and I got feedback from you all, and then I said, and at the time it was because we were getting inundated with complaints, and I said, I was going to take an ordinance amendment to the council because I needed to deal with this tiering issue. And what happened was the complaints stopped coming in. I did discuss it at council and got some feedback. And then I just never got an ordinance together because I got swept up in some other stuff. So I have feedback from council, which is, and it's based on what you all said, which is you want to be involved in the tiering process. So it's not one that takes place, behind the curtain, but it's something that takes place at a meeting, and we all agree about what the criteria are, about what gets to be a tier A and a tier B, and tier A is something that wouldn't necessarily qualify as a complaint, but it's going to be dealt with. And then B is stuff that's more in the traditional vein of what you would expect to see in terms of a CPRB complaint, and something that would go through, be eligible to go through the entire process. And you all and the council both wanted CPRB to be integral to that, so that, as I said, nothing would take place behind the curtain. That's all fine. I think you're in a much better position now with all the experience that you've had with these appeals to understand some of the issues. And so I could see this being part of a package of things, including, the bringing forward a possible change in eligibility criteria. I mean, there's a whole list of things, but this is something that is going to require an ordinance change, I think, just so it's completely transparent to folks. But there are clearly things that, have made it through to your, to your plate that shouldn't have been there. And I think now you have a sense of what those things are. So I think you're in a much better position to opine when the issue is before the council about the things that you think are appropriately there and things that could be dealt with in another manner.
I agree, but Scott was first too. Do you want to follow up or?
The way I understand this system works is that certainly when it comes time, if council changes the ordinance and the mayor signs off, and they vote and the mayor signs that ordinance, I would hope that, this group could be involved in, some of the nuts and bolts issues, because I agree completely with what Carol said about recent experience. But it also is going to require some significant input from legal. Every time we try one of these, we potentially run up against an FOP problem with the labor agreement between the city and the Fraternal Order of Police. And so right now, what I would like to do is to consider is And the only thing I think we can do right now, just so that this is, doesn't get forgotten, is to formally as a group, we'll either decide or decide not to allow for some kind of tiering. And so, I'm in my mind working up a motion right now that, I would ask us all to vote on. And that could go in the hopper with the April the 5th discussion with council. I agree completely, Ricardo, with you, and recognize that we probably should have been a little bit more active first person with council. So that would be an opportunity. So I think we can help with the details, but right now I don't know what else we can do except to discuss, perhaps make a motion and then vote on whether or not the ordinance should be amended vis-a-vis a tiering structure. So that's all I was going to say before Carol started.
Thank you. So in reaction to you both, I'm compiling my own great need for this in several categories. There needs to be a place where people complain about city employees that's not through us, for example, or whatever else. There's details that we have gained through experience, and therefore I agree very much with Carol. We can opine pretty knowledgeably, but I'm further than that. I don't think council ought to act with this without us, because we're the ones that are going to end up with the package of what they vote on. So we either put our opinion forward of what it is that we would want to do and how we want to be involved, or it's going to end up on our lap anyway. So, I want to choose my soda, and I like Coke. So I'm got to put that early, and otherwise I'm going to end up with 7-Up on my hands. So that's why I think we can define that process even further from what we've had before. And Carol was working on her own. Because I really do think it's part of the intake process, and giving that, let's say that it's the HRO or a subcommittee of us, this is how you're going to choose them, and these are the categories, and the categories are formed by our experience of what we've gotten and which ones are appropriate for us and which do not fit us, and somebody else in the city must take. I don't want to reduce my workload for the sake of reducing it. We must deal with what we've got, but certainly we must be smarter as to what we get. So coming back to process, and I appreciate you thinking of what to propose, Scott. I just want to know whether you're in agreement that we should be more involved, and therefore we should come up with the categories and the criteria. Because if not, we can just punt it to them and say we want to change, and that's all we put out. So.
Well, I guess what I am first trying to do is to get a sense of how the rest of the board feels about the whole idea of tiering. And I think that we've heard enough public comment that we can anticipate some of the negative reaction. Accusations have been made that the police and then the review board are kind of sweeping complaints under the rug. If in fact we go to a tiered system in a way that could be more transparent, but we are essentially putting ourselves in the position of receiving a complaint that should get cataloged and should get responded to, but may not result in a police investigation. And so I just want us to make sure about that basic sort of understanding before we start talking about, how we want to slice and dice this.
Any response, anybody? So as far as I know, we have done as much as we can to not sweep anything. And so I can vouch for, as far as I know, no case has been swept. In fact, we have included with numbers a lot of things that may not have had, and that includes a couple of the ones we've done in hearings. We erred on the side of inclusion of inconformity rather than throwing out. I've also been present to every hearing that we've had. And I can vouch for that process. And so I understand that accusations and interpretations and even any other input from the public, because we also have compliments, are important, and I do want to hear them. But first of all, I want to make sure that we that understand, that have been through the process, can put forth what we have learned to make a better process. So let's take input, but let's put it together so we have input on something that we put out. Carol.
I just want to make a suggestion, since some of this has been discussed in the past and you have new members who haven't been able to participate in it. And as I said, there was 2 different discussions at the council. And so perhaps we could put together a little package that excerpts the different discussions that have taken place in the past at CPRB and that took place at council. And so people will understand also what I was offering as a way of tiering, because you've really had 3 different kinds, in my mind, you've had 3 different kinds of cases. One is cases that should have never been in front of you, and they were numbered, and so they were given a complaint number, and some of them were appealed, and then you were, as I think, Ricardo, you mentioned, a little handicapped by the 5 choices of that you have in terms of how to dispose of a case, when really what you wanted to say was perhaps this should just be dismissed because it doesn't belong in front of us. So that's one type of case you've had. Another type of case you've had would be maybe this tier A or tier 1, or I forget how I had broken it out before, but something that's a little bit more, maybe it's a process issue. Maybe it's, I mean, we had talked about the kinds of things that would be in a lesser tier that maybe wouldn't rise to, like if somebody had their uniform was askew or something, or they didn't have the right uniform on. Is that really something that should, go through the whole CPRB process, or can that be handled separately? So that would be, as I said, I forget how I did it, but let's say that's tier A. And then tier B are the things that are the I would say more serious types of things that some other boards like yours have carved out for themselves, that we only hear these types of things. And I had put some of that together. So perhaps before you get a position from your colleagues, we could put all that together so they could review what's been said up to this point and then take a position. I'm just offering that if it would be helpful.
I think you're offering to put together something, which is nice. Let me add to the categories that we've talked about. So the one that you labeled B is comportment of officers. Did they behave, and does that meet policy, or is that whatever? But for me, we've also discussed, and this has relationship to other things, but group complaint. That is a complaint not by first person, however we want to call it, because that's a category of inconformity with police that may or may not be generated by a person. And we talked about, not happily so, but I think we should not lose, is maybe there are times at which this board generates some complaint or a letter to the police. There's also, and this fits in the first category that you mentioned, but I think it's got to be clear. There needs to be not just an administrative kind of complaint, but the opportunity to say no when it's not somebody in the police. That is, we've talked about uniform officers, and we rehashed that recently. What about the secretaries in the police department? They're not uniformed necessarily. Do we take those complaints? Is it anybody in the police department? Is it anybody in the city? We need to chop those up into categories that say, and then these are the CPRB ones that we are suggesting that we keep under CPRB review. So if you provide that summary, we can augment it and then talk about it at the next one. I know this is a long-term process and it does weigh on us, but it's best to do it right than to do it too incompletely. Okay? Are we good?
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks. This is cooperative. So that's 6C. The last one for me is.
Well, hey,
Go ahead.
Ricardo.
Yeah.
Anthony Allegretti unmuted.
Okay.
So I didn't know whether he had something that he wanted to say before Carol got started. Again, if anybody else on the board feels like they want to just discuss this generally, I'd be really happy to hear any thoughts.
Thank you.
I want to go back to that point. So
Me too.
Before Carol spoke, I had a question about, in organizing which appeals we heard, haven't we kind of already started to do this?
Yes.
Okay. And for the most part, it seems to be at least working out as far as getting through the appeals. What we're talking about doing is kind of just doing it at the lower level and putting them in different buckets. I guess my only, the question I had, or that came to me was, there's nothing in the ordinance that says, that the complaints can't be organized. Are we saying that the complaints coming in are going to fall into different categories? And then we have to figure out who's going to do that.
That's
But
right.
we're saying, based on the category, they're not going to get the same treatment. That's the issue, is that the resources aren't being applied equally to particular.
Yes, your observation is correct. We've been doing our best with what we've got. And what we got was a backlog of complaints.
Right.
That we've been dealing with as they were appealed. Not every complaint that we've had over the last 2 years has risen to the level of appeal for various reasons. But of the ones that we got, some of them were taking in as maybe a complaint. They weren't sure. So I was sitting in the meeting when we decided that everything that had been put forward as a complaint or as an inconformity, got a number so that we wouldn't miss anything.
Right.
But just as it's happened recently, a couple of those, we just didn't, somebody said, we shouldn't be dealing with this. And I said, bear with us. We are dealing with it because we chose to deal with everything rather than cut something out. And we made that up, if you will, over the last 6 months, but we did it so that we would not toss out anything. But chances are the number of complaints will go back to, I don't know, let's say a dozen per year, and we wouldn't need much of that. But establishing the who decides and what they decide with criteria is a part of the process that they could use to say, and all of them get heard by CPRB. We don't want to toss out anything. We just need to have the mechanism to organize them into priorities.
Right.
So, and right now those priorities have been had as we've needed to, and we've threaded those that relate to each other, whether they were at the same level or not. So, thank you. And I am very willing to hear, but when I switch screens, I am no longer seeing. So thank you, Scott, for calling it out. Okay. I'm going to move on. All right. 6D, our last item of new business, is just to point out that the March 30th is the last time that they'll be talking about use of force. And the use of force policy by the police is something in a much broader frame than the CPRB. And it's not only this city, but across the country. Use of force, you know, whether it was Miss Floyd or, I mean, so many instances nationwide that created a very tense situation because of atrocities. Ultimately also came down to us and use of force policy in the city. I have watched intently ACLU, NAACP, and the city discussions, but I have not paid 100% attention except when the use that might implicate the CPRB. I have chosen to listen then and not put myself out there because it gets very complicated, and actually I want to hear what other people are saying. Ultimately, what they decide comes to us in the same way. Is it use of policy? And did the officer err in applying that policy, and do we agree with the chief or not? For us, that section stays the same so far. And the details of the policy, I want to address as a person, but not necessarily as CPRB. But I put those dates on there to remind everybody, we all have that prerogative. And unless you guys say you want to be more active as to how that comes down to us, I haven't moved on it any more than that. I have not testified at the listening sessions or at city council on it. I just want to make sure that you guys are, what you guys are thinking on it. And if you want to leave it as is, that's fine. But I wanted to point out that the last chance, if you will, it won't be the last chance because of state law, but the milestones are getting closer. So March 30th is use of force. Okay, I see your faces, I see your eyes. I see smiles.
I don't have any more input. I mean, I've read the ACLU and NAACP treatment or feedback to the use of force policy that was authored by Mrs. Pearson and Spindell, and thought those were good ads. And I know that the city is in the process of working through those and considering that. And you know, from one perspective, I would say that, you know, although I have opinions about that, we don't see enough use of force here for me to have really formed an opinion vis-a-vis CPRB specifically. The very few taser discharges that we've had full reviews of were really our only opportunity to do that, besides just learning training curricula and listening to Mr. Slosher talk about escalation and stuff like that. So I think we're in a good place, and I'm just hoping that the city is, and I think they will be open to that input. So.
Okay. Good enough for me. All right. Carol, any input? Any requested input from CPRB?
I don't think so. The meeting on the 30th is between city folks and representatives of the ACLU and NAACP. So it's really kind of, you know, final, you know, pen to paper, and, you know, it's going to be pencils down pretty soon. So I think people have done as much as they can, and then any changes that we have to incorporate because of changes in state law will be yet another iteration. But, you know, for all the time, you know, I think it's time to implement a new policy, because for all the time it's taking us to implement a new policy, we still have the old policy. So even if it, nothing, these things are not static, they change over time. And so I think we've reached a good balance, and we shall see on Tuesday. So.
Okay. Then we'll move on from that, and we'll leave it at that, as individual input as needed or as people feel. Thank you. That finishes our new business. We have some announcement before we come back to public participation comments. So I ask you guys to be ready for your comments so we can take note. The date for TASER reviews is most likely then our next meeting on the April 28th. Be part of the meeting. We've talked about the vacancies. The HREO, I saw the ad on Facebook. I know that it's an independent company that is doing the recruitment, but I thought it was interesting that it showed up on my Facebook feed as I don't know whether they were saying you may be interested, or maybe they just want me to ask a friend.
Ricardo, I'm sorry. Can we go back to A for just a bit?
Yes.
Or can I go back to A?
You go.
I just want to make a request. Given the fact that probably the only people that have watched the discharge are you and I, of the current board members, that we make sure that we take both of these cases, from start to finish. I'm particularly interested in the one that we are re-reviewing from, I believe it's April the 19th of 2019 now. That we get full documentation for those from UPD and staff. Of course, we used to do this with just displays, and I don't think anyone but you or I have had an opportunity to do that either. But those packets are about the same volume as a completed portal thing for a complaint. We developed a special form for TASER use early on. And so in addition to 5 or 6 typed reports from individual officers, the person who actually held the TASER and used it fills out a piece of paper that has some interesting detail in it. For example, did the display of the TASER, just the display, seem to dissuade I'll just call them the perpetrator, the person upon whom the TASER was used. Things about timing, things about discharge cycles. So this is our opportunity to get everybody up to speed to do 2 real full spectrum reviews. And I would just, and of course, who knows how many squad cameras and body-worn cameras we may get excerpts from. And so, as I mentioned before when we were talking about use of force, really this is our one opportunity where we are commissioned to look at a specific use of force. And so I hope everybody, I hope we will get a complete set from UPD and staff, and I hope everybody will take the time to look at those ahead. And then typically what happens is that somebody runs tape and talks about it. So we kind of have a person from UPD who's there in the room with us, per se, sort of leading us through the action. So anyway, I just wanted to expand a little bit.
It's good training. It's good training. And in fact, it's not only training, our new board members have gotten, their first run at the use of a TASER and what it is that's happening and why and all the rules. And so you and I will rehash it so that we're ready too, because it's been a while. But I'm hoping that at the next meeting, not only is the portal already full of that information, but that we had reviewed it. Being in front of camera to review things, not a closed session, we are examining whether they follow the rules and whether things were kosher, were correctly during those discharges. But the meetings are different for me in that the deliberation is made not only in front of this camera, but we see the relevant parts and rehash them if we need to, so that other people know enough to see that disposition. But it does mean that we have to watch them beforehand, you're correct, and there's a lot of stuff involved. It is a good time for questions, and it is a good time, I think, Deputy Chief Searles will be here with his trainee on the person who will be handling the videos from here on. And so they're also being trained. They're training a new person to show us those things and to take the tapes. So I want us to be ready, and that's why I've been announcing it and prepping for it. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we could actually swing it in a regular meeting as the two cases.
That's how it was always done before.
We always did.
Yeah. Now, when we do that, we go into a special meeting format, just so everybody thinks about it. We don't really go into closed session, but because at the end of the TASER review, we are, I'll just use the word mandated, to provide any kind of feedback about the TASER incident. There's actually like a little sub-hearing sort of thing that happens, which, frankly, we've stumbled over occasionally in the past in terms of how we kind of got into this and got out of it. But
because it's hard. Once you start having all the data in front of you, it's hard. And so I believe that that's good education, not only for us to make a decision, but for the public to see that these things are serious. They were brought into the city, for me, as a much better alternative than just shooting somebody to kill. But darn it, every person I've seen go through the TASER, it's nasty. So once we have the full information, then we can comment on things. But anyway, so yes, prep yourself and read what's on the portal and check out all the information pieces beforehand so that we use the meeting as a warming up of the evidence rather than a brand new thing to you, okay?
Yeah, one thing is for sure, there's only one case in the portal right now.
Yeah.
So we don't have both cases in the portal currently, but.
Yeah. All right, so I'm in dialogue. I emailed Deputy Chief Searles to make sure that they're ready for it. Okay, thank you for coming back to that. So next regular meeting, April 28th, is when we'll be doing that. And 7 Ds to not forget. We are still working on hearing dates. I don't know, Carol, do you have some suggested dates for our next hearing? As you come back to camera, let me ask the public if anybody's interested to speak. This is a good time to raise your hands so that we can go through them.
Sorry, I just got dates from Jason, so I'll be putting a doodle poll together and sending that out. So I don't have dates for you now.
Okay, good enough. As long as we're working towards them and to be putting them out, so we can do that.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. That finishes out the regular part, the top part of the agenda. I want to go back for inviting public input, and raising your hand is the way to do it. So we have 10 people attending, including our camera operator. So if you'll raise your hand, I have first Tracy Chong as our first speaker. And the system says I can ask him to unmute. Thank you. There you go. Go ahead, Tracy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Chong.
Hi, this is Tracy Chong from Urbana. I just want to say that I am looking forward to your next meeting where you'll review the long-awaited re-review of the 2019 Taser incident. And I just wanted to say that I think it's a great idea that at the suggestion that you guys have the material beforehand and get a chance to review it at your own time, so you can play it as many times as you want and like refer back to the ordinance, and I just think it can be more thoroughly done rather than just sitting there and having it being played and then having Lieutenant Sills like narrate exactly what's going on, which kind of makes it biased in a way. So like if you're doing it on your own and you can refer to your own ordinance, take time to think, I think that's a much better idea. So thank you.
Thank you for the encouragement. I think that it's both in hearing you and others, but it's also a good idea for us to, frankly, practice on doing it fully so that we can see and understand what's going on. And as we see it, we can share with the public what's going on. Actually, this is a good reminder from somebody at one of the previous meetings. So we, as panelists, we still have Scott, myself, Anthony Allegretti, Anthony Rice, Katrina, Carol Mitten, the City of Urbana, video people, Tamara as our secretarial and everything else support, and then Lemon Peppers is also in the room. 10 people attending, and we have one more hand raised. We'll ask you, you're next, Christopher, and then I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. So at that point, we can close. Thank you. Christopher.
Hi again. So at the beginning of the meeting, I read kind of a rough case law that I've been putting together from things that the CPRB has done in the past year or two, and I thought of a few items to add to it, so I'm going to go ahead with that. The UPD and the city can violate the CPRB ordinance all the time, and there's never any accountability. The complainant has no right to see the findings of their own complaint, and they will not get it even if they send FOIA requests, at least not in any meaningful way because it's all redacted. The UPD can evade the Urbana complaint process by violating state records laws, and no one will hold them accountable to that. And there's no understanding whatsoever from the appellant's side after an appeals hearing. So those are just a few more points. Those are pieces of data that I have collected as I've been observing the process recently. I think you guys would agree with at least some of those. Here's another one. CPRB members can't talk about closed sessions, but they can talk about closed sessions when it's personally useful to a CPRB member. That was a weird one that came up. A question I had that I thought of during your meetings, I think you guys had mentioned something about the training materials. You asked Tony and Tony if they'd done some training materials. I thought those were supposed to be posted online so that the public could see them. Whatever training the CPRB members can go through, the public is also supposed to be able to see that stuff. I couldn't find it, so I'm not sure if it's not on the city website or anything. So if you could tell us where that is, that'd be great. It was raised during the meeting an issue of, I think Ricardo had said, Daryl Price always brought this up, issues of jurisdiction of the CPRB. Any issues of jurisdiction that have been raised recently about the CPRB, that is what types of complaints you can and can't hear, have been completely and entirely invented. You need to look at your ordinance. It defines what a complaint is. And then it doesn't say the city can deny this type of complaint and this type of complaint. And it doesn't say the city can make up new obstacles to complaints. And it doesn't say the city can just invent new rules about what things are and aren't complaints. All the discussion that's been had about that is just complete imagination land. Now, if the CPRB wants to talk about changing the ordinance so that we change what the definition of a complaint is and what can or can't qualify, that's fine. But to basically just have city staff just deny any complaints that they find inconvenient or that don't fit their mold is wrong. And the CPRB members, I would hope that you guys should recognize that rather than talking about it after the fact saying, yeah, we were doing the right thing by denying these complaints. No, you weren't. Mr. Price was wrong every time he brought up jurisdiction. There's no jurisdictional issues in your ordinance that should have prevented any of the complaints that were denied recently. So I wish you'd just stop inventing those things. Now, if you want to talk about changing the ordinance in the future, that's fine. But don't act like what was done in the past in terms of denials was right. Because there was no jurisdictional issue. Mr. Price was inventing that problem. As a reminder, a lot of the things I've mentioned, your ordinance, the CPRB ordinance, does tell you to work directly with the Human Relations Commission if problems come up. So we've talked about issues like FOIA. This is city staff violating state law in regards to police records. Now, this body can say that you don't want to hear about issues of FOIA, but it is certainly in your ordinance that you should go to the Human Relations Commission and city staff and say, this is a problem that relates to police complaints and it needs to get solved. I'm wondering, has this body ever approached the HRC as your ordinance indicates? And then I disagree that there haven't been enough complaints because there aren't enough angry people. I mean, if you consider the number of people who are angry about the Alea Lewis arrest, I mean, how many complaints did you get? 2? And that people don't trust your process. That's why they're not submitting the complaints. And I don't agree that you have erred on the side of inclusion. You've erred on the side of not including complaints and denying them. That's been my experience. And I think you need to consider some, and I'll end with this, I think you need to consider some really new ideas and reach out really far. Consider something like every time someone has contact with the police, they should be asked if they want to have their incident reviewed as a complaint. You're going to have to reach out really far to get people to want to participate in this. I think it's not just going to be, another post on the city website. If you want to actually hear complaints, you're going to have to get people to believe in your process and believe that it's worth their time. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen, for your comments. We have Emily Close next.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Emily Close. I live in Champaign. Your focus tonight was a little bit broad, so I'm going to narrow my focus in my comments to some of my own experiences and observations. I am discouraged. Actually, I'm shocked and disappointed that only one complaint has been filed in 2021. As a participant in the complaint process in Champaign and a regular speaker at your meetings, I find it beyond discouraging that citizens are clearly not engaging in the process. In Champaign, they're moving toward better outreach to the community at their CSR. I don't think outreach is the problem here or in Champaign. People don't feel safe coming forward if they don't trust the process to be fair. It can feel rigged. Let's face it, you really aren't independent. You're a board that is under the thumb of the city administrator who is in the service of the Fraternal Order of Police. These legalities and complexities hamstring the board from really finding out what happened between the officer and the citizen who filed a complaint. Who wants to invest blood, sweat, tears, time, plus deal with unbelievable stress just to find out that the whole process is designed to favor the officer? There's no satisfaction in that outcome. At some point, people just give up in frustration because they just don't feel heard. I feel like the board spends a lot of time spinning its wheels, trying to get the attention of the council with mixed results. I hope the incoming council gets down to business and votes to make changes to the CPRB ordinance so that it is a real working document, and so that citizens and police officers alike feel satisfied with the result. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Close. Any comments from board members?
Appreciate all the public input. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Anybody else? Okay, I do want to answer one because I don't think it's fair that what I said about Beryl would be taken to that level. I think that, and I did not add it verbally, but I think it should. I think Beryl was and is very good at reminding us what was in the complaint and what is in the appeal. And I'm going to recommend that we spell out somewhere that in the process that we do, if somebody complains about 5 things and the chief only addresses 3 in his letter, that we deal with the other 2 also as a complaint, or that we point out that remand it to deal with the other 2, let's say 3 out of 5. On the other hand, when something comes to appeal out of the original 5 issues, if the complainant only complains about 1 thing, then it is only fair that we as a board only deal with that complaint about that 1 issue, even though there were 5 originally. And that is where I think Daryl was excellent at pointing out which issue is being brought before us, was it part of the complaint, and is it being addressed as an appeal. Any other everything, I mean, denigrating him or putting on of your context for somebody else, it's not only not fair, it's misinterpreting, and that I won't stand for. Lastly, I, as a chair and as a board, we're under no one's thumb, and it is unfortunate that we keep being accused of that because it shows your lack of understanding of everything and every hour that's sacrificed to understand how we best deal with complaints. We are trying to be fair. We will continue to be fair no matter what we are accused of, because we are doing our best as regular neighbors, understanding a process, following the rules, and trying to be best. I may agree that nationally, police officers have had protections that I don't agree with, but I am obligated to respond with the city when it is already part of what policy is. And we are the final voice when a complaint is put forward, whether something was consistent. And then we are free to add when something seems unfair, even when it is consistent with policy. But I will not accept accusations that don't fit us. We are doing our best, and you can vote and do whatever else. We welcome your comments, but I don't agree that that's a good way to collaborate to make things better, given the much process that we're going through. And lastly, as far as I'm concerned, people trust us enough to put their information before us because it is painful, it is hard, and I understand that we need to make it better. And as we try to do that, anyone who has been wronged ought to have a fair hearing and a fair way to put in a complaint. But I do not agree with the conclusion based on nothing else but hypotheticals that we are not trusted because the process is flawed. There is no evidence for that, and until you can prove that, I will not accept that as a fact. It is an opinion, just like many others, including my own. And so I end tonight's meeting. I'll take a motion to close.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Katrina. Let's do the official roll call.
Tony Allegretti,
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Katrina Kindle,
Yes.
Tony Rice,
It's already,
Yes.
thank you. All right, we'll see you at the next hearing if we do it before the next regular meeting. Have a good night, everybody.